The Zereth Dominion had ruled the sector for centuries. Their empire stretched across thousands of planets, their war fleets unmatched in firepower. No species had ever dared to challenge them, not truly. Skirmishes happened, rebellions rose and fell, but no real threat had ever emerged. That is, until today. Admiral Zorvek stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the holographic display in silence. A single unknown vessel had entered Dominion-controlled space, drifting toward the outpost on Crax's IV. It was small, its design primitive, lacking the elegant curves of Dominion warships. The reports labeled it as human-made. Zorvek frowned. Humans? The lesser species from the Sol system? The ones who had barely begun expanding beyond their own planet a few centuries ago? They were not warriors. They were not a threat. Yet, something felt wrong. The moment the ship entered their space, Dominion long-range scanners glitched. Surveillance satellites failed. Communication with Crax's IV went silent. Zorvek turned to his officers. "Has the outpost reported anything?" A nervous officer shook his head. "Negative, Admiral. We lost contact 3 minutes after the vessel was detected. No distress signals. No transmissions. Nothing. That was impossible. Even in a full-scale invasion, the outpost should have sent something. A warning. A scream. But there was only silence. Send a squadron. I want that ship boarded and its crew taken alive," Zorvek ordered. Minutes later, 3 Dominion interceptors broke away from the fleet and sped toward the unknown vessel. As soon as they entered close range, something happened. Their engines shut down mid-flight. Their weapons failed. Their shields flickered and died. The pilots' panicked voices came through the comms for a brief moment, shouting about something moving inside the ship, something watching them. Then, static. The 3 ships drifted lifelessly in space, unresponsive. Zorvek's blood ran cold. "Pull them back." Now, the recovery attempt failed. The Dominion fleet watched as the small, unremarkable human vessel turned not to flee, but to face them. It had no visible weapons, no energy spikes indicating an attack, yet the very air inside the flagship felt wrong. A deep, crawling unease spread through the crew. "Scan that ship again," Zorvek ordered. The officer's hands trembled as he tried. I can't. It's blocking our systems. The moment we scan, our computers freeze." That was not possible. Even the most advanced warships in the Dominion's fleet didn't have that capability. Then, without warning, Crax's IV exploded. The entire planet, an outpost filled with thousands of Dominion soldiers, vanished in an instant. There was no warning, no buildup, no attack detected. 1 second it was there, the next, only fire and debris remained. Panic spread across the bridge. How? There was no weapon discharge. No fleet. No attack. Zorvek clenched his fists. It was the humans. It has to be. But that ship doesn't have the firepower. The officer stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening in horror. The holographic display of the destroyed planet was changing. Among the wreckage, something was moving. Small, fast objects darted between the debris, adjusting course. At first, they looked like escape pods, but then the system recognized their shapes. They were soldiers. Humans. "Open fire," Zorvek ordered immediately. The ship's guns roared to life, beams of plasma streaking toward the approaching figures. But the moment the energy reached them, they vanished. The blasts passed through empty space. Then, the Dominion's lights flickered. The ship trembled as if something was inside, moving through the halls. Unseen security alarms blared. Screams echoed over the comms. "They're inside." "We don't know how, but they're inside the ship." Zorvek turned sharply. "How many?" "Unknown, Admiral. We can't track them." AGH? The officer's body convulsed, his eyes turning black for a brief second before he collapsed, lifeless. The bridge descended into chaos. More crew members dropped one by one, their expressions frozen in terror. The humans were not fighting a war with weapons. They were fighting a war with something far worse. Desperate, Zorvek activated the self-destruct sequence. We can't let them take the ship. He expected an explosion, expected to die as a warrior. But nothing happened. The sequence had been disabled. Then, over the ship's speakers, a voice spoke. Not Dominion. Not machine. Human, we were never your prey, it whispered. You were never the hunters. Zorvek turned to his remaining officers, but they were all gone. The bridge was empty. He was alone. The holographic display of the human ship flickered. The insignia of the Dominion was replaced with a simple, chilling phrase. The war has changed. Zorvek finally understood. This wasn't an invasion. This wasn't a battle. This was a message, and the Dominion had just received it loud and clear. The battlefield was supposed to be a slaughter. That's what the Excelthor Dominion believed when they invaded the human colony on Vara 7. Their warships darkened the skies, their ground forces marched across the burning cities, and their generals mocked how easily humanity would fall. The Dominion had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, stronger, more advanced, more dangerous civilizations than these weak, soft-skinned primates. But something was wrong. The war was not ending. It was not following the usual pattern. The humans were still fighting. They refused to die. General Uxorovan stood on the command deck of his mobile war station, watching the battlefield through holographic screens. His forces had overwhelming numbers, weapons that could burn through steel, and technology centuries ahead of anything humans could build. They had destroyed the colony's defensive shields, wiped out its fleet, and reduced its cities to rubble. And yet, the human soldiers kept coming. They had been ambushed, outnumbered, and bombarded. Their bodies had been torn apart, yet they never stopped fighting. He had seen one human take a direct hit from a plasma cannon, his body shredded, armor cracked, blood pooling around him. His forces had moved on, confident the soldier was dead. But minutes later, their scouts reported that the same human was standing again, moving like nothing had happened. Reports kept coming. Soldiers shot through the heart, standing back up. Limbs torn off, still fighting. Grenades detonated in their midst, yet no bodies were ever found. The Dominion's front line was collapsing. The troops, once fearless, now hesitated. They whispered among themselves in their guttural language, voices filled with unease. "They don't die," one officer muttered, his claws gripping his plasma rifle too tightly. "They should be dead." "Why aren't they dead?" Sorovin snarled. This was ridiculous. There had to be an explanation. Some advanced technology? A battlefield drug? It didn't matter. He ordered an entire sector firebombed, reduced everything in a 3-mile radius to glass and ash. He watched from orbit as the inferno consumed the battlefield, turning it into a molten wasteland. There was no way anything had survived that. The Dominion troops cautiously moved in, searching the burning ruins. And then they heard the footsteps, dot a T first. It was just one. A single, armored figure stepping through the smoke. Its visor cracked, armor dented, flesh burned, but still moving, still alive. Then another appeared. And another. And another. Soon, hundreds of human soldiers emerged from the flames, eyes glowing red behind their helmets. Not a single one had fallen. Panic spread like wildfire. Dominion soldiers fired desperately, emptying their weapons into the advancing humans. They hit their targets, but it didn't matter. The humans kept walking forward, unfazed. Those who fell to the ground stood back up moments later. Sorovin watched in horror as his army broke, his finest warriors abandoning their weapons and running for their lives. Some refused to flee, trying to fight, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, only to be torn apart in seconds. Desperate for answers, Sorovin ordered a captured human to be interrogated. The prisoner was dragged into the war station, his armor stripped away, his face covered in blood. He should have been dead 3 times over. Instead, he just smiled. Sorovin stepped forward, his voice cold. "What are you?" The human chuckled, spitting blood onto the floor. "Your worst mistake." Soravan narrowed his eyes. We have killed you. Again and again. And yet, you still fight. How? The human leaned forward, his expression turning deadly serious. You never killed us. Confusion flickered across the general's face. Impossible. We saw your bodies fall. You saw what we wanted you to see, the soldier whispered. We don't die. We don't surrender. We don't lose. You think you're fighting humans. You're wrong. You're fighting something we created. Soraven's mandibles twitched. Created? What did that mean? Before he could demand more answers, alarms blared through the war station. The ship shook violently, as if something had just appeared on board. The command deck's screens flickered, the lights dimming. Static buzzed through the comms. His officers shouted over each other, panic rising in their voices. Security breach. They're inside. But the airlocks never opened. Soravan turned back to the prisoner, but he was gone. The cuffs lay broken on the floor. No alarms had sounded. No doors had opened. He had just vanished. Screams echoed from the lower decks. Gunfire. Explosions. A new transmission appeared on the main screen, a live feed from one of the security cameras. Soravan watched as his warriors ran through the halls, weapons ready only to be cut down by shadowy figures that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Their armor was human. Their bodies moved unnaturally fast. They didn't dodge bullets. They let them hit because it didn't matter. They're here, one officer whispered in horror. And then, over the ship's speakers, a voice spoke the same voice as the captured human, calm and mocking. We tried to warn you. We told you to leave us alone, but you didn't listen. Soraven's hands shook as he realized the truth. This was not an ordinary army. These weren't just soldiers. They were something else. Genetically engineered? Clones? Something worse? He didn't know. He didn't care anymore. He only knew one thing. The war was over, and the Dominion had lost. The battle was over before it even began. That's what the Skari Imperium believed. The humans had been cornered, trapped inside their own failing battleship, surrounded by 3 Skari war cruisers. The wreckage of their fleet drifted lifelessly in space, torn apart by superior firepower. Their engines were dead, their weapons disabled. Escape was impossible. This was a clean victory. A message to the rest of humanity that resistance was futile. Admiral Zex stood on the bridge of the Skari flagship, his mandibles twitching in amusement. He watched the human battleship on the main display, its hull scarred and blackened from battle. The Skari had studied humans for years. They were dangerous, yes, far more aggressive than most species. But in the end, they were still weak. Their technology was crude. Their bodies were fragile. Without their ships and weapons, they were nothing more than animals waiting to be hunted down. Zex gave the order. Board the vessel. Take them alive if possible. Kill them if they resist. Hundreds of Skari warriors launched from their cruisers in boarding pods, attaching themselves to the human battleship like parasites. They breached the hull, cutting their way inside with plasma torches. Within minutes, they flooded the dark corridors, moving like a swarm, their rifles raised. Their helmets scanned for movement. Their infrared vision cut through the smoke. But the ship was silent. Too silent. Something was wrong. The humans should have been waiting for them, guns ready, fighting to the last breath. But there was nothing, no resistance, no last stand. Just empty halls, dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. The only sound was the soft hum of the dying reactor. Where were they? Squads moved deeper into the ship, spreading out, securing each deck. Zex monitored their progress through the command feed, watching the helmet cam footage as his troops swept through the corridors. The humans had to be somewhere. They couldn't have just vanished. And then, the first squad went silent. 1 second. Their vitals were normal. The next flatlines. No gunfire. No distress calls. Just gone. Zex frowned. Squad data, report. No response. He switched to another squad's feed, just in time to see something move in the shadows behind them. A flicker. A blur. Something fast. Before the warriors could react, the lights cut out. Then came the screams. Gunfire erupted in the darkness. Shouts of panic filled the comms. They're here. They're everywhere. The feed cut to static. Zek's mandibles clenched. What is happening? Someone report. A lone voice crackled through the speakers, heavy with fear. Admiral, we are not hunting them. They are hunting us. Zek's blood ran cold. On the display, squad after squad disappeared, their signals vanishing one by one. This wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. Then, for the first time, a human voice came over the comms. Calm. Mocking. You think we're the ones trapped with you? A low chuckle. No. You're trapped with us. Zex felt something he had never felt before. Fear. His warriors were dead. Their bodies were piled in the halls, their weapons untouched, their armor barely scratched. They hadn't been shot. They hadn't been stabbed. They had been hunted, torn apart with terrifying precision. And standing among the bodies, barely visible in the dim red lights, were the humans. But something was wrong. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Their movements were too controlled, their eyes too cold. They didn't look tired. They didn't look wounded. They stood there, waiting like predators who knew the hunt wasn't over. Zik's claws curled into fists. He had to cut his losses. Pull out. Get our troops out of there. But there were no troops left to pull out. The human voice returned. You came into our ship thinking we were prey. You thought we were broken. Weak. Finished. A pause. A quiet, deadly whisper. You were wrong. The ship shook violently. Alarms blared across the Skari fleet. Zex turned to his officers, but their faces were pale with terror. Their ship, one of them, stammered. It's moving. Impossible. The engines were dead. They had disabled them, but the human battleship was coming to life. Power surged through its systems. The emergency lights switched to an eerie red glow. The thrusters ignited, and every weapon on its hull turned toward the Skari fleet. Zik's mind reeled. How? Then he understood. The humans had never lost control of their ship. They had been waiting, luring the Skari inside, playing dead. And now, the real battle was about to begin. The last thing Admiral Zek saw before the screen went black was the battleship's new transmission ID, not its name, not its fleet designation. Just a single chilling phrase. WELCOMETOHELL. And then the guns fired. The sky burned. Earth, the last human stronghold, was under siege. The Dralaxar Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had finally reached humanity's home. Their fleet covered the upper atmosphere like a black storm, blotting out the sun. Their ground forces had already torn through the outer colonies, crushed every space station, and reduced Mars to rubble. Now, only Earth remained a dying planet standing alone against an unstoppable force. Grand Warlord Exarax watched from the bridge of his command ship, his red eyes gleaming with victory. Humanity had fought well too well. Their weapons were primitive, their fleets outdated, and yet they had resisted longer than any species before them. Even now, they refused to surrender. Xerax admired that. He would have considered sparing a few of them, keeping them as war trophies. But orders were orders. The Supreme Council had declared total extermination. Humanity would be wiped from existence. His fleet rained fire upon the cities below. Skyscrapers crumbled, entire districts vanished in a storm of plasma, and oceans boiled under the relentless assault. There was no hope left. Earth's orbital defenses had fallen. The last of its fleets had been obliterated. The final human stronghold, hidden beneath the ruins of old military bunkers, was all that remained. Xerax gave the order. Send in the ground forces. End this. Thousands of Dralaxar warriors descended in drop pods, crashing through the shattered streets, marching toward the last human bastion. No transmissions came from the bunker. No final message. No pleas for mercy. Just silence. It was over. Humanity had fallen. And then the signal came. It was a single transmission, broadcast across every channel, every frequency, even hijacking the Dralaxar fleet systems. The voice that spoke was calm, steady, and filled with something Xyrax did not expect: confidence. "You think this is the end?" Xyrax's mandibles twitched. "Who was this? You believe Earth is finished? That we are broken?" For the first time, Xyrax hesitated. He turned toward his officers, waiting for them to track the source. But something was wrong. His ship's systems were failing. Communications jammed. Shields flickered. Weapons powered down. The humans were doing this. But how? "You think this is our last stand?" The ground troops outside the bunker stopped. Something shifted beneath them. The earth rumbled. Xyrax's eyes widened as massive doors hidden beneath the ruins slid open, revealing something impossible. It was not a bunker. It was a launch facility. And from its depths, something rose. At first, Xyrax thought it was a mistake. A trick of the light. But no, it was real. An entire fleet was emerging from underground hangars. Warships untouched by battle, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever fielded before. Stealth plating, plasma weaponry, quantum engines. These were not the same ships his empire had crushed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The humans had never been losing. They had been stalling. They had been waiting. "You see, Warlord," the voice continued, now filled with cold amusement, "this isn't our last stand. It's yours." The ground trembled as massive anti-orbital cannons emerged from hidden silos. Before Xyrax could react, they opened fire. Energy beams pierced the sky, ripping through the Dralaxar warships like paper, cutting them apart in mere seconds. One shot, one kill. Panic erupted across the fleet. Xyrax's officers shouted over each other, struggling to regain control. They couldn't. Every system was compromised. Earth's forces were no longer just defending, they were attacking. On the surface, the human soldiers emerged from the ruins, clad in advanced combat armor, weapons glowing with energy unfamiliar to the Dralaxar. They moved fast, too fast, striking with precision and brutality, cutting down the invaders with terrifying efficiency. The Dralaxar warriors tried to fight back, but their weapons were useless, jammed, overheated, turned against them. Xyrax's breathing quickened. This wasn't possible. They had studied human technology. They had crushed their best fleets. They had burned their colonies. Where did this power come from? And then it clicked. They had been deceived. For years, the humans had shown the galaxy only what they wanted them to see: outdated ships, conventional weapons, standard tactics. They had played the role of a struggling race, hiding their true strength, letting the Dralaxar believe they were winning. But in reality, this had been a trap all along. Xyrax's heart pounded. He had to escape. He turned to his helm officer, but the expression on the warrior's face told him everything. It was too late. The human fleet, new and unstoppable, rose into space, their weapons glowing like stars. Xyrax knew what was coming: extermination. The last thing he heard before the human ships opened fire was the voice from the transmission, now whispering like death itself. "Welcome to the real war." And then the fleet burned. Admiral Rethok of the Xelthar Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the final stage of humanity's defeat. Their last warfleet had been annihilated. Their defenses were in ruins. Earth lay open, defenseless, ready to be conquered. Victory was assured. The war had dragged on longer than expected. The humans were tougher than anticipated, but in the end, they were still weak. Their ships, though fast, lacked the firepower of the Dominion's armada. Their soldiers, though aggressive, were flesh and bone, nothing compared to the Dominion's genetically enhanced warriors. Their worlds had fallen one by one, and now nothing stood between Rethok and complete domination. "Begin the invasion," he ordered, his voice filled with confidence. Dropships launched from the fleet, descending through Earth's atmosphere in waves. The XLTHAR soldiers prepared for battle, expecting resistance, expecting one final, desperate human last stand. But as they entered the planet's orbit, something felt wrong. There were no defense systems firing back. No ground forces mobilizing. No distress calls. Just silence. Rethak frowned. Something was off. The humans should have been fighting to the last breath, not sitting quietly, waiting for death. His instincts screamed at him that something was very, very wrong. But it was too late. The first drop pods reached the surface, deploying thousands of Exeldar warriors into the ruined cities. The soldiers moved cautiously, scanning for ambushes, but there were no human forces in sight, only emptiness. It was as if Earth had been abandoned. And then, the first squad vanished. No gunfire. No explosions. Just gone. Seconds later, the second squad went silent. Then the third. Panic spread through the invading forces. Something was picking them off, something invisible, something unstoppable. "Admiral!" One of Rethak's officers shouted. "We are losing ground forces at an impossible rate." Rethak snarled. How could humans be winning? They had no forces left. They were supposed to be broken. "Pull them back," Rethak commanded. But there was no one left to pull back. His warriors, his elite super soldiers, were being erased. And then the transmission came. A human voice, cold and calm. "We knew you'd come." The screen on the bridge flickered, revealing a battlefield covered in Exeldar corpses. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just bodies. The few soldiers still alive could be seen screaming, firing wildly into the darkness at something they couldn't see. Rethak's claws tightened. "What is this? What are you doing?" The human voice chuckled. "The real question, Admiral, is what did you just walk into?" And then they revealed Earth had never been defenseless. It had been the trap. The humans had been hiding something all along, a weapon the galaxy had never seen before. Not ships. Not soldiers. Something else. Something designed to wipe out entire invading armies without firing a single shot. Rethak watched in horror as the feed zoomed in on the battlefield. At first, it looked like shadows moving across the ruins. But then, he saw them, machines. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Sleek, silent, perfect. Human-made war machines that moved without sound, that struck without warning, that killed without mercy. Not robots. Not drones. Something else. Something alive. And worst of all, they were completely invisible to enemy sensors. The Exeldar had never even known they existed. "You see, Admiral," the voice continued, amused, "you never actually invaded Earth. You walked into our testing ground." The machines ripped through the remaining soldiers, their bodies falling in silent heaps. Nothing slowed them. Nothing stopped them. The invaders never even had time to understand what was killing them. Rethak's fleet, still hovering in orbit, prepared to retreat, but they couldn't. The same machines that had wiped out his ground forces had already breached his ships. His officers collapsed, their bodies lifeless before they even realized they were under attack. His weapons, his shields, his communications, all useless. Humanity's secret weapon wasn't just on Earth. It was already inside his fleet. The realization struck him like a death blow. The humans had spent years pretending to be weak, hiding their real technology, their real weapons, letting the galaxy believe they were just barely surviving. And then, when the enemy came knocking, they sprung the trap. This wasn't an invasion. This was an execution. And then, for the first time in his long military career, Admiral Rethak felt true fear. The human voice spoke one last time. "Goodbye, Admiral." And then, the Exeldar fleet vanished, erased from existence, just like their ground forces. The war was over. Humanity had won. And the galaxy? It would never see them the same way again.